Would you believe me if I told you that even silence can hide a miracle? In a luxurious mansion by the sea, a millionaire lives haunted by a mystery that not even money could solve. His son was born deaf, and no doctor, no surgery, no technology could explain why. Until a humble maid coming from the countryside steps into the house and changes everything. Not with science, but with something the millionaire had long forgotten: the power of love. What she discovers in the boy's room will challenge logic, faith, and even the heart itself. But be careful, this isn't just a story about sound and silence. It's about what happens when the soul decides to listen to what the ears cannot. Get ready to dive into a drama of redemption, faith, and hope, where the impossible becomes real. Now, before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this story from? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications, because stories like this, the kind that move you and make you rethink everything, you'll only find here. Alexander Reed's mansion stood atop the cliffs of Malibu like a monument to silence. The billionaire in technology lived there with his son, Liam, a 7-year-old boy born deaf whose presence seemed to amplify the emptiness that echoed through the glass walls. Every room reflected a life calculated to perfection, with no noise, no improvisation. The sound of the sea reached them faintly, muffled by the sealed windows. Inside that world of control, time moved slowly, as if waiting for something no one could name. Alexander was a man of precise routines, capable of predicting the stock market but unable to decipher his own heart. Everything in the house operated flawlessly. The sensors, the automatic lights, the meal schedules. The staff spoke softly as if afraid to disturb the air. The millionaire believed silence was a form of order, and that emotion was a flaw to be fixed. Yet the silence was also a mirror of his loneliness. Liam wandered through the mansion's corridors with light steps, observing everything with a perception that went beyond sight. He could feel the floor's vibrations, the changes in the air, the tiny shifts others failed to notice. Doctors called him hypersensitive, but there was something more. The boy seemed to hear the world differently, not through his ears but through his soul. And that sensitivity made him the only one aware of what was about to happen. It was into this world of order and emptiness that a new maid arrived. Emma Clark, fresh from Texas, carried a serenity that contrasted with the sterile atmosphere of the house. Her experienced hands moved calmly, and her attentive eyes seemed to understand what words could not. From the very first day, she noticed that the house lacked not cleanliness but life. Each gleaming surface hid stories still breathing, waiting for someone to listen. While the other servants followed protocol, Emma observed quietly. She noticed the way the boy stared at the sea through the window, and how the millionaire avoided his son's gaze. There was an invisible distance between them, built over time and cemented by grief, and though she could not yet explain it, the maid sensed something wrong, something not merely physical. The silence there was not natural. It was a prison. The millionaire remained detached, treating her with the formality of someone who avoids attachment. To him, the maid was just another cog in the machinery of his perfect life. Yet little by little, small gestures began to alter the atmosphere. A window opened in the morning, let in sunlight. A vase of flowers on the table softened the cold routine. Imperceptible changes reshaped the air, and the house began to breathe again. Liam noticed first. The boy started following Emma around, quietly curious about her presence. She didn't speak much, but there was something in her movements that calmed him. He could feel the rhythm of her steps, gentle and steady, unlike the metallic hum of the machines filling the mansion. For the first time, he approached someone without fear. The millionaire watched from a distance, puzzled by this new energy infiltrating his ordered world. That night, the sea seemed more restless. The wind slipped through the cracks of the windows, carrying an unusual sound. The maid, finishing her chores, heard a faint buzzing coming from Liam's room. She froze, uncertain. She knew the boy couldn't hear, yet the sound seemed to respond to her own breathing. She stepped closer to the door and saw the child move as if drawn by the vibration. The air thickened and the silence, once absolute, began to pulse. In that moment, something invisible awoke within the Reed mansion. None of them could grasp it fully, but a shift was underway. The millionaire slept, still haunted by the past. The maid remained alert, sensing patterns no one else could perceive. And the boy, hovering between dream and wakefulness, reacted to something beyond rational explanation. The sound of the sea merged with the sound of the impossible, and the first echo of the mystery began to rise. The second day in the mansion began with the sound of the sea and the distant echo of footsteps over marble. The new maid, Emma Clark, walked quietly through the corridors, observing every detail of a place where silence seemed to be law. The air was heavy, as if every wall held secrets. The millionaire, Alexander Reed, hardly noticed her. He was locked away in his office, surrounded by reports and equations. Inside those walls, time followed the rhythm of machines, not emotions. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harlow, watched Emma with austere eyes. She was a woman of impeccable appearance, but with a hard gaze, seeing in the maid an intruder in that world of luxury. Every simple gesture Emma made felt like a silent challenge. When she cleaned the main hall, the housekeeper would remind her of her place. Things work differently here. Emma would simply nod, unoffended, maintaining the serenity that disarmed without confrontation. That morning, Emma was assigned to tend to Liam's room. Upon entering, she noticed that the space was far too orderly for a child. The toys were arranged like decorations, and the air smelled of isolation. The boy sat in silence, drawing with quiet focus. As she dusted the shelves, he lifted his gaze, sharp, curious, as if trying to understand who this woman was, the one who moved the air so gently around him. Liam watched Emma's movements closely and reacted strangely to subtle sounds in the house. She noticed that he turned his head when the wind brushed through the curtains, as if sensing something. She approached slowly and tapped her fingers lightly on the table. The boy reacted, not startled but smiling faintly. The maid realized he wasn't indifferent to sound. He perceived it differently. It was as if he heard the world through vibration. Emma began to pay close attention to this behavior. Rather than seeing it as a limitation, she saw a rare sensitivity. While cleaning the window glass, she caught Liam's reflection, the boy touching the floor, feeling the tremor of the wind through his fingertips. The once cold house seemed to gain movement through them. The millionaire, however, remained skeptical, convinced that what Emma saw was mere coincidence. Logic left no room for miracles. One afternoon, crossing paths with Alexander in the hallway, Emma greeted him politely. He replied briefly, eyes still fixed on his tablet. Yet her presence began to disturb him, not by appearance but by essence. There was something in the maid's quiet calm that broke the artificial balance of his world. He couldn't understand why his son seemed more alive when she was near. Doubt took root, though pride stopped him from admitting it. The next day, Emma noticed something new. While sweeping the room, Liam tapped his fingers lightly against the wall as if testing sound. She observed him, intrigued. The boy repeated the gesture several times until a gust of wind entered through the window, and the curtains swayed in perfect rhythm. Emma smiled subtly. That was no accident. There was communication there, an invisible dialogue made of silence and sensitivity. And in that moment, she felt something extraordinary taking shape. When she went to make the bed, Emma leaned closer and on impulse whispered, "Do you understand me, Liam?" The boy slowly lifted his face, looked directly at her, and smiled. He truly smiled, for the first time. The gesture was simple yet transformative. There was no doubt he understood. The maid felt her heart quicken, and time seemed to hold its breath. Downstairs, the millionaire heard footsteps and faint voices, but couldn't explain why the air suddenly felt lighter. From that moment on, something within the house began to change. Emma awakened in Liam what science would call impossible. He started seeking her presence, responding to her gestures as if discovering a new sense. The millionaire, though unconvinced, watched from afar, uneasy. The housekeeper saw in it a threat to the order she protected so fiercely, and the sound of the sea, once distant, began to merge with the first echoes of hope. The nights in the Reed mansion had grown heavier. The sound of the sea, once distant and steady, now seemed closer, as if something were calling from outside. Liam slept little and wandered through the corridors in silence, clutching his sketchbook. The maid, Emma Clark, sensed a strange unrest in the air, a presence that came from neither the wind nor the machines. The millionaire, trapped in meetings and reports, didn't notice that the real noise came from within his own home. One afternoon, Emma found Liam in the inner garden, sitting on the cold stone floor, his eyes fixed on nothing. The boy placed his hand on the ground, feeling the vibrations, and frowned as though hearing something no one else could. She called his name, but he didn't respond. Then she approached and touched his shoulder. The child looked up, confused, pointing to his ear, where the small hearing device flickered with a dim light. The maid realized he seemed to be in pain. He pressed his hand against his ear, a soft murmur escaping his lips. Emma saw that the boy was trying to describe the humming that had been tormenting him for days. It was constant, deep, making him clutch his head in frustration. The doctors had dismissed it as psychological, yet there was a strange rhythm to that hum, a pattern he had drawn repeatedly in his notebook, made of circles and glowing waves. During dinner, the millionaire noticed his son's discomfort but looked away. The fear of reliving loss kept him imprisoned in denial. Emma served quietly as the wind rattled the windows, making the crystal glasses sing with a faint, eerie tone. Suddenly, Liam stopped eating and turned toward the wall, as if hearing something from within it. No one else heard a thing, only him and perhaps the maid, who felt the same shiver move through the air. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. A faint, high-pitched sound echoed through the halls, a distant lament that resembled the sea's cry. She grabbed her flashlight and climbed the stairs barefoot, careful not to wake anyone. Passing the millionaire's office, she saw him asleep at his desk, surrounded by dark screens. She continued toward Liam's room. The door was ajar. The room lay in semi-darkness, and the boy trembled beneath the sheets. Emma sat beside him and brushed the hair from his forehead. The boy murmured softly, his hand at his ear, distressed. The maid turned on her flashlight and whispered for him to stay still. The beam revealed movement, something inside the ear, so faint and fast it could hardly be real. Emma gasped. For a brief instant, a tiny glow pulsed like a living fragment of light. Then it vanished. Silence filled the room again, thick and secretive. The boy opened his eyes and looked at her, frightened. She held him close, trying to calm him as her heartbeat quickened. In the corridor, the wind pressed against the glass, producing the same metallic tone Liam had drawn days earlier. A soft echo, like a voice trying to be born. Emma looked toward the window and, for a second, thought she saw the reflection of something luminous. She didn't know if it was real, but deep down she knew it wasn't her imagination. The next morning, the millionaire noticed Emma's tired eyes. He asked what had happened, but she only said the boy hadn't slept well. He didn't insist. For Alexander, life was built on explanations, not intuition. Yet, as he passed by his son's room, he sensed the air had changed, subtly alive, as if the space had breathed during the night. He ignored the feeling and returned to work, but the sound lingered, imperceptible, like a promise. The maid, meanwhile, couldn't forget what she'd seen. The light inside Liam's ear haunted her like an unfinished thought. There was fear, but also a strange, quiet hope. She knew it wasn't ordinary, that perhaps the truth lay beyond what any doctor could comprehend. That night, before sleeping, she looked out toward the sea and heard the same distant hum. And within the wind's whisper, there seemed to be a voice, something between a calling and a warning. The night had not yet ended when Emma woke in fright, her heart racing. The sound she'd heard the night before returned stronger, as if something were calling the boy's name from within her own thoughts. The mansion, wrapped in ocean mist, seemed alive, every wall breathing a different kind of cold. The maid walked through the corridors with her flashlight in hand, her eyes fixed on the door to Liam's room. Inside, the silence was thick, heavy as the air before a storm. When she opened the door, Emma found the boy sitting upright in bed, his eyes wide, hands pressed tightly against his ears. The millionaire still slept in another room, unaware of the call that pierced the dawn. The maid rushed to him, knelt down and tried to calm him, but the boy trembled, pointing frantically to his ear. The humming, now audible even to her, sounded like a vibration, metallic and alive. Fear turned into urgency. There was something there, something that didn't belong to the ordinary world. Emma whispered for him to stay still and reached for a small white cloth, the one she always carried in her pocket. With her flashlight, she leaned closer to his ear. The light revealed the glow again, brighter, pulsing, and for the first time moving. A blue flicker shimmered, then a faint golden one, as if something were fluttering inside him. The maid steadied her hand, her expression firm yet tender, and did the unthinkable. She reached out with the cloth and tried to remove what she saw. What appeared before her was impossible. A tiny, translucent creature, no larger than a fingernail, floated between her fingers. It emitted a soft blue light and a pure tone like the echo of a distant choir. The air in the room became lighter, almost sacred. Liam screamed, not in pain but in astonishment. It was a human sound, loud and alive, breaking the silence for the first time. The voice of a child who had never been heard. Emma dropped the cloth, overcome by both fear and wonder. The scream echoed through the house. The millionaire woke and ran down the corridor, his heart pounding, thinking he was dreaming. When he burst into the room, he found his son laughing and crying at once, the maid kneeling beside the bed and the flashlight on the floor still glowing. On the sheets, the small, luminous creature faded slowly, dissolving into particles of light. Alexander froze. For a moment, the man who believed only in logic stood before the impossible and had no words. Emma looked up at him, speechless. Liam's tearful eyes met his father's, and he stammered softly but clearly, "I heard you, Daddy." Time seemed to stop. The millionaire, overwhelmed, sank to his knees. That single moment, the first sound of his son's voice, and shattered years of guilt, loneliness, and disbelief. The maid, still trembling, held the boy in her arms as the light from the fallen flashlight reflected gently over them, as though the room itself had begun to breathe again. Minutes later, doctors and staff filled the mansion. The house, once drowned in silence, now pulsed with footsteps and voices, yet no scan, no instrument could explain what had happened. Liam's ear was perfectly normal, uninjured. The tiny glowing being had vanished completely, as though it had never existed. The millionaire, dazed, demanded answers no one could give, and Emma, calm but weary, simply observed, knowing that something sacred had crossed that night. While the others debated, Emma picked up the fallen cloth. A faint glimmer still shimmered on its edge. She folded it carefully and tucked it away. The millionaire, confused, asked if she had seen anything. She hesitated for a moment before replying softly, "I saw light." He didn't understand, but her tone carried a truth beyond explanation, and for the first time, belief flickered in his eyes. Dawn came slowly, painting the sea in shades of gold. The Reed mansion felt different. The wind was lighter and the ocean's sound carried the tone of an ancient song. Liam slept peacefully, breathing with ease. Emma, exhausted, stood by the doorway, the folded cloth in her pocket and a quiet glow in her eyes. The millionaire, standing beside the window, looked toward the horizon where the sun rose over the waves. And for the first time, silence no longer frightened him. It was the sound of life beginning again. Dawn brought a different kind of silence to the Reed mansion. The sound of the sea, once a constant lament, now echoed like a soft sigh. Liam slept deeply, breathing calmly, and for the first time the air inside the house felt human. The millionaire stood at the doorway, watching his son, his expression caught between awe and disbelief. He, who had always trusted numbers, formulas, and diagnoses, now faced something no report could ever explain. Doctors arrived in procession, carrying devices, cameras, and technical jargon. They surrounded the room as if they could capture a miracle in data. They examined Liam, measured his pulse, tested sound waves. Everything was normal. No trace of the creature the maid had described. One doctor shook his head, muttering that perhaps the boy had responded to an emotional stimulus. But the millionaire, restless, couldn't accept that something so profound could be dismissed so simply. Emma remained silent, standing by the window with her hands clasped before her apron. Her calm face contrasted with the doctor's agitation. She neither defended herself nor tried to explain. She only observed. The maid knew what she had seen did not belong to the realm of logic, but revelation. In her pocket, she kept the folded white cloth, now dull but still heavy with meaning. It held more than dust. It held memory. When the house finally emptied, the millionaire returned to the room. The noon light spilled through the wide windows, reflecting the moving sea. He stared at Emma for a moment, his face hardened. "Did you really see something?" he asked coldly. She took her time before answering, her voice soft but firm. "I saw what needed to be seen." It wasn't defiance. It was truth. That answer disarmed him more than any scientific argument ever could. Hours later, as he reviewed the security footage, Alexander noticed something strange. The audio from the previous night was corrupted. There was no sound of Liam's scream, no trace of the creature, only a constant static hum, as if the system itself had refused to record the impossible. Frustrated, the millionaire ordered the tests redone and accused Emma of tampering with the equipment. She listened in silence, offering no defense. Something stronger than words lingered in her gaze. something he couldn't name. While chaos overtook the mansion, Emma reached into her pocket for the white cloth. The fabric, once light, now felt cold to the touch. As she unfolded it, she saw a faint glimmer still there, small, nearly invisible, but alive. She placed it gently inside a glass vial she found in the kitchen, hiding it deep within a drawer. The maid knew it was no insect, no invention. It was silent proof that the impossible had crossed their threshold. In the days that followed, Liam began responding to sound. He recognized voices, the crash of waves, even the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Sometimes he hummed soft melodies no one had ever taught him. The millionaire, hearing this, felt his throat tighten. Memories of Celeste, his late wife, returned. She had always believed sound could heal. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself it was coincidence. But each word his son spoke brought him closer to what he'd spent years denying, that love endures beyond reason. One morning, while tidying the study, Emma found a stack of old newspapers. One headline caught her attention. Dr. Celeste Reed studies biological frequencies capable of restoring auditory function. The faded letters trembled in her hands. The name, the photo, it was her, the millionaire's late wife, Liam's mother. The maid understood that the mystery hadn't begun that night, but years earlier, with a promise made to the sea and to sound itself. When she showed the clipping to the millionaire, he stood speechless. The memory of his wife seemed to echo in the walls, an invisible presence. She believed sound could heal, he murmured almost to himself. Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon outside. Beyond the glass, the wind carried the ocean's song, the same tone Liam now heard. And in that moment, neither the man who had everything nor the woman who had nothing could deny the truth that bound them, the secret that lived in silence. The sound of the sea seemed stronger that morning. The waves crashed against the rocks as if trying to reveal a forgotten secret. The maid, guided by a quiet curiosity, crossed the garden and made her way to the old laboratory on the estate, an isolated building covered in ivy and dust. The wind carried the salty scent of the ocean mixed with the memory of something alive. Inside, everything felt frozen in time, as if the place had been waiting just for her. As she opened the door, Emma felt the cool, damp air wrap around her. The room was filled with scientific instruments, glass flasks, and old tapes stacked on a rusted table. The sound of a recording began to echo, soft, hypnotic. A woman's voice came through the speakers, calm and poetic, filled with tenderness and sorrow. It was the voice of Celeste Reed, the late wife of the millionaire, speaking about biological frequencies and human emotions that heal. The maid stood motionless, listening as if time itself had stopped. Each word seemed to blend with the rhythm of the waves outside. The tape spoke of a microscopic creature discovered deep in the sea, something that responded to empathy, touch, and love. Emma felt a shiver run through her, as though something unseen was watching her, something that recognized her heart. While exploring the dusty shelves, she found a blue-covered journal with the name C. Reed embossed in faded letters. Its pages were filled with notes and intricate sketches of luminous, tiny, vibrating forms. Celeste had described her experiments with oceanic sounds and her belief that certain frequencies could reawaken living tissue. The maid realized that the woman's research wasn't just scientific. It was a search for salvation. The sound from the tapes grew louder, and Celeste's voice became more intimate. It responds to human emotion. When the heart feels, it lives. Emma looked around, and for an instant a blue glow flickered through the air, a shimmer, like an underwater reflection. The air vibrated, and the sound of the sea seemed to pour into the room. The millionaire in another part of the mansion heard the same echo but didn't know where it came from. The mystery was moving again, silently, inevitably. Later, Alexander Reed appeared at the doorway of the lab. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and longing. He saw the maid standing before the tapes, his wife's voice echoing softly through the room. He approached slowly, touching the recorder with trembling hands. The voice said, "If one day the silence becomes too much, seek the sound in the sea." The millionaire closed his eyes, as if finally understanding something that logic had kept from him for years. The space seemed to pulse with life. The reflection of the ocean through the windows cast shifting blue lights across the walls. Emma and the millionaire stood there side by side, listening to the waves and to the woman who, even in death, still guided them. The contrast between the sterile luxury of the mansion and the living rhythm of the sea grew clearer, as though nature itself were trying to return what money had silenced. Suddenly, Liam appeared in the hallway, drawn by the sound. His eyes, blue like the ocean, sparkled as he listened to the same echo from the recordings. He pressed his small hand against the glass as if recognizing an ancient melody. Emma knelt beside him, and the boy smiled. The same smile Celeste wore in the old photographs. The millionaire felt his chest tighten. The science he worshipped could never explain that moment. The sound faded, and silence returned with the gentleness of a prayer. But something had changed. The air felt different, as if the house itself had begun to breathe again. Emma carefully placed Celeste's journal inside her apron, knowing it was more than a scientific discovery. It was a spiritual inheritance. And deep beneath the ocean, somewhere unseen, something still pulsed, waiting to be found once more. The sunset painted the Malibu sky in shades of orange and violet. Inside the Reed mansion, the silence was no longer heavy. It was reflective, almost spiritual. The millionaire walked through the corridors like a man searching for something he had lost long ago. The distant sound of the waves carried echoes of Celeste's voice, his late wife. Each step he took led him not only across the cold marble floors, but deeper into his own soul. Emma, the maid, continued her work with the same quiet grace, though something in her eyes had changed, a light of purpose. While tidying the study, she placed Celeste's journal on the desk, open to a page marked by a drop of water. Alexander stopped before it and read in silence. "Faith begins where science falls silent." The phrase lingered in his mind, like a whisper that refused to fade. That night, as the wind stirred the curtains, the millionaire and the maid sat side by side in the main hall. Between them, a warm lamp cast golden light over the portraits of Celeste. He spoke little but listened deeply. For the first time in years, Alexander allowed himself to be vulnerable, and strangely, he found strength in that. Emma, her voice calm and firm, told him that love is the only science that needs no proof. The sound of the sea drifted through the window like an ancient hymn. The maid shared stories of her days in the hospital, of patients who recovered simply because someone held their hand. The millionaire, used to laboratories and equations, listened as if hearing his first true lesson. Their dialogue became an experiment of its own, one governed by faith, the other by reason. In the days that followed, Emma spent more time caring for Liam, while his father watched from afar. The boy, now almost fully able to hear, reacted to the sound of the waves and to the soft laughter of the maid. It was as though the sea spoke to him through her voice. The millionaire, bewildered, saw his son blooming without understanding how, and began to realize that not everything true must be explained. But the mansion had its watchers. Mrs. Harlow, the housekeeper, observed the growing closeness between Emma and Alexander with tightening resentment. She couldn't bear the thought that a maid could fill the emotional space once held by the lady of the house. Her jealousy grew in silence, fed by pride and fear. Then one day, while cleaning Emma's room, she found the small vial containing the glowing fragment. She held the vial up to the light and saw the faint blue pulse within it, alive, beating like a heart. Her eyes widened, not in faith but in greed. The next day, she left the mansion quietly and met with a representative of a rival pharmaceutical company to Reed Technologies. She sold the secret for a generous sum, believing she had gained power, but she had no idea she had just traded something that money could never truly possess. Meanwhile, the millionaire and the maid continued to draw closer, unaware that fate was already moving silently against them. At night, they spoke of the line between science and miracles. Alexander confessed his fear of believing again, and Emma replied simply, "Faith doesn't ask you to understand, only not to give up." Her words hung in the air like an unspoken prayer. The wind grew stronger that night. The ocean roared as if trying to send a warning, and deep within the mansion, the sound of the old tapes began to play again, blending with the crash of the waves. Celeste's voice, soft and distant, seemed to whisper through the corridors. "Beware of those who no longer listen to their hearts." And so, without realizing it, the millionaire and the maid crossed the fragile line between reason and faith, and the real test was only beginning. The silence of the Reed mansion was shattered by the distant hum of helicopters and the flashing of cameras. Outside, reporters crowded at the gates, drawn by a story too extraordinary to ignore. The rival company, Pharmatech Biogen, had just announced to the world the discovery of a microorganism capable of restoring human senses. The millionaire watched the press conference on television, frozen in disbelief, as the screen showed something eerily familiar. A blue glow inside a vial identical to the one Emma had once kept hidden. Emma, the maid, stood motionless as the images flickered before her. Her heart pounded. That glow was unmistakable, as if the miracle itself had been stolen from her hands. Mrs. Harlow, standing in a shadowed corner of the room, watched everything with the calm of someone hiding a crime. The millionaire, gripped by anger and disbelief, turned toward Emma, his eyes sharp and cold. "You knew about this?" he demanded, not waiting for an answer. The maid, her voice trembling, tried to explain that the vial had vanished mysteriously, but her words fell into an abyss of mistrust. Alexander, consumed by wounded pride, couldn't see the truth standing before him. "Was this all a lie?" he shouted, breaking the very silence that had once connected them. Outside, the media's cameras caught the image of a powerful man, but not the sound of what was breaking inside him. Hearing the commotion, Liam ran down the stairs. The boy, now accustomed to the sound of the world, realized that the real noise was coming from the hearts of the adults. He grabbed the maid's hand and pulled her away from his father. "She didn't lie, Daddy," he cried, his voice fragile yet brave. It was the first time the millionaire had heard his son speak so clearly, and the first time he found himself unable to answer. The next morning, the media had seized the story. Headlines screamed across the globe. Millionaire accuses maid of scientific theft. Paparazzi surrounded the mansion. Drones hovered over the garden. Emma was escorted out by security, her face calm, eyes unbroken. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she murmured softly. "I came to heal what was sick." The millionaire, standing at the window, watched in silence as the car disappeared down the coastal road. But fate has a way of answering when the heart is unjust. The very next day, a video went viral. Liam crying before the cameras, shouting her name, "Emma," with the desperate purity of someone losing something irreplaceable. Millions watched the moment. Hashtags exploded. Headlines multiplied. The world now knew the maid who had healed the deaf boy. The millionaire, once celebrated for his science, had become the face of soulless arrogance. Inside the mansion, the sound of the sea had changed. It no longer soothed. It accused. The millionaire, alone in his study, saw his reflection in the window, a man surrounded by technology but devoid of truth. Celeste's recording still echoed in his mind. "Sound belongs to love, not profit." Those words, once poetic, now struck like a judgment. Meanwhile, in a small rented room near the beach, Emma watched the sunset through a dusty window. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. The wind carried the rhythm of the waves, the same sound that had once healed Liam. She knew the truth needed no stage, only time. A pure heart always finds its way, even when the world chooses lies. And out there, across televisions, newspapers, and glowing screens, the miracle had become a spectacle. The millionaire, trapped in the cage of his own guilt, watched his son become a symbol of hope. The world now praised the maid, while he faced the emptiness that power could never fill. The waves kept echoing along Malibu's shore, reminding him that some truths can't be bought, they can only be heard. The sound of rain still echoed through Malibu when Emma, the maid, decided to follow the silent call of destiny. Alone, carrying a small suitcase and a heavy heart, she returned to the abandoned laboratory of the late Dr. Celeste Reed. The walls were coated with dust and sea salt, and cracked windows let in the distant hum of the ocean. The air itself seemed to breathe memories, whispers of a woman who believed that sound could heal the soul. Emma turned on a flashlight and walked among the rusted instruments. On a table draped in old cloth, she found tapes labeled by hand, Project Vital Frequency. Pressing play, she heard Celeste's soft voice. "It responds to human emotion. When love is pure, the sound changes shape." The maid closed her eyes, feeling that phrase vibrate within her chest, as if her very soul were answering back. As the reels spun, images from the past took form. Emma saw herself years earlier, in a small hospital in rural Texas, dressed in white, caring for a pale, gentle, patient, Celeste Reed. Back then, Emma was still a nurse, unaware that one day she'd become a maid in the home of that very family. Celeste had held her hand and said, "When silence becomes too much, bring life back." Words forgotten for years now returned, glowing with new meaning. Across the coast, the millionaire walked alone along the beach, the wind striking his face with cold force. The scandal had left him in ruins, his company under investigation, his reputation in shambles, his son silent once again. Everything he had built through logic and power had crumbled before the one thing he couldn't buy: truth. The sea's voice sounded like judgment, and every wave carried the name he was trying not to remember: Emma. Back in the laboratory, Emma found one final recording, different from the rest. It was a voice message left by Celeste shortly before her death. "Alexander doesn't understand, but Liam was born to hear what others cannot. If anything happens to me, trust Emma. She is the bridge between heart and sound." The maid froze. The voice seemed to travel through time, reaching her in that very moment. Now she understood. Nothing she'd lived was coincidence. The truth bloomed like a secret long buried under sorrow. Emma, tears glistening softly, realized she had been chosen not by chance but by compassion. The love she felt for the boy, and even the quiet tenderness growing for the millionaire, were part of something far greater. It was as though Celeste had orchestrated every step, every meeting, every sound. And in that instant, Emma knew. The miracle wasn't that Liam could hear, it was that people could learn to listen again. Meanwhile, the millionaire discovered an old letter in his home, addressed to Emma. Inside was a note from his wife. "If you ever meet this woman, trust her. She carries the gift science forgot." Alexander fell to his knees. Everything he had ignored now stood before him as a late revelation. The weight of guilt mingled with remorse, and for the first time, pride gave way to faith. The next morning, sunlight finally pierced the clouds. Emma returned to the mansion, and unafraid, unresentful. The gate opened slowly, and the millionaire waited at the door. No longer in a tailored suit, no longer a man of titles, just a soul standing before redemption. Between them, silence was no longer absence but communion. "You always knew, didn't you?" he asked. Emma simply nodded. The wind carried the ocean's sound as if Celeste herself were answering. And so, as the waves broke gently against the rocks, the past began to heal. The maid looked toward the horizon and knew that something still awaited. A final echo of destiny, a last test between faith and love. The millionaire, standing beside her, understood that some truths return not to wound but to free. The sound of truth had come back, and with it the first glimpse of hope. The sky over Malibu darkened like an omen. The wind howled across the cliffs, and the ocean roared in waves that grew wilder with every passing second. Inside the mansion, the millionaire ran through the hall searching for his son, the sound of thunder blending with his frantic heartbeat. Liam was gone. Panic took hold of him. He shouted the boy's name, but the storm swallowed his voice whole. The clock struck midnight just as Emma, the maid, discovered the boy's empty room and the window blown wide open. Outside, the rain fell in heavy, slashing sheets. Palm trees bent under the wind, and flashes of lightning lit up the cliffside. The maid, her uniform drenched and her curls plastered to her face by the rain, ran barefoot through the mud, calling Liam's name. The millionaire followed close behind, stumbling, his polished shoes sinking into the soaked earth. In that moment, there were no titles, no hierarchy, just two hearts desperate to save the same miracle. The waves crashed violently against the rocks. Far in the distance, between bursts of lightning, Emma saw a small figure standing at the edge of the cliff. Liam was there, arms spread wide, listening to something no one else could hear. The sea was calling him. The maid moved carefully, slipping on the wet ground. "Liam, don't move!" she shouted, but the wind tore her words away. The millionaire caught up, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with fear. He tried to step forward, but Emma reached out her hand, stopping him. "He's hearing something," she said, her voice trembling. The boy stood motionless, gazing toward the horizon where sea and sky became one. Emma felt the same vibration inside her, that familiar resonance from Celeste's recordings, the melody of the woman who had entrusted her with the impossible. Then, beneath the rolling thunder, Emma began to sing. It was a simple, ancient melody, the same one from the tapes. Her voice, soft yet unwavering, cut through the roar of the storm. The millionaire stood frozen, watching as something changed in the air. The wind slowed, and the sea began to respond to the rhythm of her song. A soft blue glow appeared, swirling gently around the boy like luminous dust. Liam turned slowly, tears mingling with the rain, and ran into the maid's arms. The moment she held him, a bolt of lightning split the sky and struck the sea, casting a wave of blinding light. The blue glow dissolved, scattering into the air like stardust. The millionaire ran to them, collapsing to his knees in the mud, embracing them both tightly. For the first time, the sound of Liam's crying wasn't distant or impossible. It was real, raw life, reborn under the thunder. The storm began to fade. The ocean, once furious, now whispered softly. The air smelled of salt and redemption. Emma looked toward the horizon, where the clouds began to break apart. The millionaire, breathless and soaked, wiped the rain and tears from his face. He heard it, Emma. He really heard it, he whispered, like a prayer finally answered. The maid smiled, cradling the boy's face between her hands. They stood there together on the edge of the world, surrounded by the sound of the sea and the breathing wind. None of them dared break the sacred silence. The millionaire looked at Emma and saw not just the woman who had saved his son, but the bridge that had reconnected him to his own soul. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. She answered simply, "The sound was always here, Alexander. You just had to listen." The clouds parted and the first ray of sunlight reflected on the calm waters. The ocean, once chaos, now sang. The millionaire, the boy, and the maid descended slowly from the cliff, bathed in the golden light of dawn. The sound of the wind blended with Emma's soft voice as she hummed the melody that had saved Liam. And for a fleeting moment, the world felt whole again. The silence after the storm felt louder than thunder itself. The Reed mansion, now bathed in soft morning light, seemed to breathe as if awakening from a long nightmare. The millionaire walked slowly through the halls, still wearing his mud-stained clothes and weary eyes, yet there was something new in him, a lightness money had never given him. Emma, the maid, sat beside Liam, holding his hand as the boy slept. The sound of the sea, calm and steady, filled the room like a prayer. The newspapers had already reported the impossible. The boy who heard again. Cameras, reporters, and curious onlookers surrounded the gates of the property. The millionaire, once accustomed to appearing on business magazine covers, was now sought after for a miracle he couldn't explain. He closed the curtains and took a deep breath, remembering Emma's words. "The sound was always here, Alexander. You just needed to listen." For the first time, those words made sense and hurt like truth. When Emma entered the room, the millionaire stood up. There was no arrogance, no air of command, just a man standing before the woman who had returned to him what he had lost. Faith. "I accused you, humiliated you, and still you stayed," he said softly. The maid, in her simple uniform and serene gaze, replied, "I stayed because your son believed in me, and deep down so did you." Between them, silence was more honest than 1,000 apologies. That morning, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope bore the seal of the rival company, the same one that had stolen the discovery. Inside was a formal document, public apology and retraction. The millionaire read it and chuckled bitterly before tearing it in half. "Now they want to clear their name," he muttered. Emma, calm and composed, answered, "Forgiveness isn't for those who wronged us, Alexander. It's for those who refuse to carry the weight any longer." He said nothing because he knew she was right. Liam woke up, and upon hearing the seagulls outside, smiled without fear for the first time. He ran to his father, who lifted him into his arms and held him tight. The millionaire looked at Emma with deep emotion. "He heard the world, but I only learned to listen to what truly matters because of you." The maid smiled, wiping away a tear that insisted on falling. "Sound belongs to love, not profit," she replied. In the following days, the millionaire called a press conference. In front of the cameras, he didn't talk about technology or investments. He talked about faith, humility, and forgiveness. "A simple woman taught me more about life than all my scientists combined," he said, with Emma standing beside him. The audience applauded. Emma, visibly shy, lowered her head. The world saw a maid. Alexander saw the bridge between science and the divine. After the conference, the millionaire found Emma in the garden, near the fountain where the sound of water blended with birdsong. "Emma," he said hesitantly, Don't know if what I feel is gratitude or something more." She smiled gently and interrupted him. "You don't have to know, Alexander. Silence will tell you when the time is right." He chuckled quietly, like someone learning to breathe again. For the first time, the sound of the wind felt like music. As the sun sank behind the horizon, the Reed mansion seemed alive. The open windows let the sound of the sea flow freely inside. The millionaire watched Emma from afar, helping Liam water the plants, and realized that love doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes like a calm tide, transforming everything without warning. Maybe that's what forgiveness is, he thought, learning to hear the heart when the world finally goes quiet. And that night, before sleep, laughter echoed through the house. A new sound, human and real. The maid was tidying the kitchen. The millionaire was reading a story to his son, and the boy, between giggles and sleep, asked, "Dad, is the sound of love forever?" Alexander answered, "Forever, my son. Forever." But outside, the wind seemed to whisper another answer, one that would still echo across the sea, preparing the way for what was yet to come. Months had passed since the storm that changed everything. The sun rose again over the coast of Malibu, now calmer, as if the ocean itself had learned to rest. The Reed mansion was no longer just the home of the millionaire, but the cradle of a new hope. Where silence once reigned, now echoed voices, laughter, and music. The sound that had once been a miracle was now part of everyday life, and each note seemed to thank the maid who had made it possible. In the vast gardens of the property, children with hearing devices played under the ocean breeze. Some ran, others sang shyly. The millionaire, dressed simply and with a softened gaze, watched it all from afar, with Liam by his side. The former mansion had been transformed into the Celeste Reed Institute, dedicated to children with hearing impairments. The name was a tribute to the woman who had united science, faith, and love, and who somehow still lingered there. The maid, now the Institute's coordinator, walked among the children in her same blue uniform, though now she wore a badge that read, Emma Clark, Director of Therapeutic Programs. Her smile was unchanged, her voice still gentle, but her eyes carried something new, the serenity of someone who had found purpose. The millionaire, watching her, understood that true power was not in wealth, but in the ability to transform lives. That evening, the Institute's auditorium was filled with people. Soft lights illuminated the stage where Liam, now confident, held a microphone. He looked at his father in the audience, then at Emma, and smiled. When he began to sing, his voice, still fragile, filled the room with purity. Every note was a thank you to the silence that made him strong, to the maid who believed in him, and to the millionaire who learned to listen to his own heart. The audience rose in applause. Cameras captured tears, smiles, and embraces. Alexander climbed the stage and held his son tightly, unable to contain his emotion. The maid, standing at the edge of the room, watched in silence, her hands clasped, her eyes shining. When Liam saw her, he ran and pulled her onto the stage. "This is Emma," he said proudly. "She taught me how to hear the sea." The crowd erupted, and a spontaneous wave of clapping echoed like a hymn. After the event, the millionaire and Emma walked to the cliff where everything had begun. The wind carried the scent of salt and the soft hum of the waves. Liam, between them, asked, "Dad, is Mom listening?" Alexander looked toward the sea, his eyes wet with tears, and replied, "She's always been listening, son." Emma smiled, and the wind seemed to answer with a distant melody, as if the ocean itself confirmed the truth. The imaginary camera follows the three of them from behind, slowly descending toward the beach. The waves touch their feet, and Liam begins to sing again, a soft, almost whispered tune. The maid and the millionaire exchange a quiet glance, an understanding born not from chance but from pain, transformed into healing. The water reflects the sunset, painting everything in shades of gold and blue. The sound of the waves blends with the boy's voice, forming a natural symphony. The sea responds to the rhythm, as if recognizing its own song. Birds fly across the glowing horizon, and the camera slowly pulls away, revealing the vastness of the ocean before them. The millionaire, now just a man, and the maid, now a symbol of miracle and faith, stand together, no longer divided by class, but united by purpose. As the sun disappears, the last sound is Liam's laughter fading into the waves. The screen darkens slowly and a soft phrase appears like a whisper from the sea. Some miracles aren't heard with the ears, but with the heart. The wind blows once more, and the sound of the waves finishes the melody, the song of the sea. In the end, the billionaire's son and the secret in the silence reminds us that there is no greater wealth than the sound of love itself. The millionaire, who once believed he could buy everything, had to lose control to find what money could never restore: faith, forgiveness, and the true meaning of listening. And the maid, through her simplicity, proved that humility is the most powerful language there is, because in the end, it's not the full wallets, but the open hearts that turn the impossible into miracles. Now take a breath and ask yourself, what have you been keeping silent inside you? What are you waiting to hear? Love, purpose, or maybe the call to change? If this story touched you, made you reflect, or lit something within, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. Here, every story is a reminder that the true sound of life begins when the heart finally decides to listen.